Does that mean you expect me to stand right in front of that? Because I don't usually stand well behind podiums.
If you want, I can hold it.
Okay. It's great to be here. I think many of you know this is my alma mater here. I graduated from Liberty University, and so it is always an absolute thrill to come back to Liberty University. The Lynchburg Tea Party has almost been like a sort of a second tea party for me, because Mark Lloyd is a dear, dear friend. So is Kurt, so is Mike, and we've been sort of fighting in this battle from the very beginning. Like they said, Lynchburg Tea Party was one of the first that I was able to connect to from Richmond Tea Party, as we were being accused of AstroTurf by Pelosi, and I thought, AstroTurf? I don't even know if there's a tea party next door. And so I spent a couple of months going around the state trying to find out where all the AstroTurf was and get us growing together. So it's a great privilege to be here, and I've met some of you at previous events and some at the Awakening that was here a few months ago. So thank you for coming out. It's a thrill. The campaign is going really well. I'm really thrilled at the response from the grassroots, that people are looking for an alternative. And people will ask you, any candidate that's running for office, why are you running for United States Senate? That's the question that you should ask every candidate. You want to know what their motive is. And so right from the get-go, so you can understand who I am, I want to explain to you why I'm running. And then I'll tell you what it is that I'm about, what are the issues that I'm running on, and what I see as the solutions. My reason for coming to Liberty University actually started was when I was 16 years old. I was 16 years old. I went to a public high school. I wanted to start a club. It was called the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. I went in there to meet with the principal, and he told me, he said, "You can't start that. Have you never heard of the separation of church and state?" And I looked at him and I thought, well, if I haven't, that would be your problem, right? But I went to the library at 16 in my hatchback down to the library, and that was the day where you had to use the microfiche film to do your research, and started looking up articles and read a quote from an attorney that was at Rutherford Institute here at Charlottesville, and called him, and he started explaining to me about the Equal Access Clause and the Establishment Clause. And he sent me some court cases, and I went back at 16 years old and went back to the principal, and I said, look, I've done this research, and according to what I've read, you can't keep me from having this club. And he said, no, I've already told you it's a separation of church and state issue. You cannot have that in here. And I said, well, according to the attorney I've spoken with, and these cases where I've highlighted here, either I get my club or you have to get rid of every non-academic club, including your football team. The principals don't like to get rid of their football team. And that was, I tell you that story because it gives you a glimpse into who I am and what I've always been like. And it was at that moment that I knew I wanted to come to Liberty University. I wanted to learn more about fighting for my rights and standing up and having individual liberty and not having the government tell me what I can and can't do as a free person in this country. And I left here and went and worked on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee under Senator Jesse Helms. But most of my time for the last decade has been being the cattle prod to the Republican Party in Virginia for the last 10 years, almost 10 years. And it was because in 2004 we had the largest tax increase in the history of Virginia. We had a Democratic governor, and the Republicans controlled both the House and the Senate. And the Democratic governor suggested a massive tax increase. It was the largest tax increase in the history of Virginia. And the Republicans thought it was such a great idea, they thought it should actually be larger. And that's what they did. They proposed a larger tax increase than what the Democrat governor wanted. And it was at that point that I thought, what is going on with the Republican Party that I've always loved and been a part of? And so I started challenging Republicans in primaries for the last 10 years. So when the Tea Party movement, as you can imagine, came along, I found a very quick home, because it is what I had been doing, is trying to restore integrity to the Republican Party. So why am I running? Why did I go from activist in the Tea Party movement to running? Because that's a very different step, being comfortable being a cattle prod, to running for United States Senate. Well, there's two reasons. The first reason is for the first time ever, guys, when I would fight for legislation, it would be because I was opposing a tax increase, or because I was opposed to a bond referendum, or because they were killing life legislation in the health committee. It was always a specific issue or a specific bill. And it's not like that anymore. There's a distinct feeling that the America that we've always known is being erased. That is being erased. It's not about a single issue or fighting against or opposing a certain bill. And as someone who came from a military family, my dad was an Air Force pilot and traveled across the country and lived in the Germany during the Cold War prior to coming here to Virginia, and seeing West and East Berlin, and seeing centralized planning, and seeing communism. And I don't like the way it looks.
No.
I don't like what the nanny state looks like. And the second thing is, the first time ever, this distinct feeling that government was literally coming into the four walls of my living room. And what do I mean by this? Before, you could turn on the 6:30 news. Remember when that was the only time I used to watch the news? Was it 6:30? But you could turn on the 6:30 news. You could watch what was going on in D.C. And then you could turn it off at 7 and go about your day. You could go to work. You could take your kids everywhere and not really feel the impact of what was going on in Washington, D.C. That is not the case anymore. Because you feel it in everything, whether it's what your stock portfolio looks like, whether or not you're going to be able to retire, whether or not you're going to be able to put your kids in college, whether or not they're telling you what health insurance you should own, whether they're telling you what car you should buy, whether they're telling you what light bulb you should put in your lamp, whether they're telling you when you flush your toilet what the flow rate should be on your toilet, whether you go to Walmart, since we all spend so much time there apparently, and see how the prices have increased because of the Federal Reserve out of control and just totally destroying the value of our dollar. Or whether it's going to the gas station. All of a sudden, what Washington, D.C. is doing has a very real and personal impact on our daily life, on our ability to make a daily living. It's invading the four walls of our living room. And when I look at my family, and I have 3 children, some not that young, but older. As a mom, you always try to balance between being there and making sure you have everything for them now, right? They have the groceries in the car, and we just had to go right before I came here to the farmer's market to pick up what I needed for them, and making sure they get their homeschooling done because we got testing next week, and you're juggling that. And on the other hand, you want to make sure that your kids have a future, that they can buy a house, that they can go to a college, that they can have the same life you had. Well, I would suggest to you, well, let me ask you this. How many of you have heard the Republicans say, we are mortgaging our children and our grandchildren's future away? How many of you have heard that? Okay. Newsflash to the Republicans. It's been mortgaged.
Yeah.
That line is no longer relevant anymore. It's no longer about what are we going to provide for our future. This is about the fact that the future and the now have collided. This is about what is your life going to look like in the next 24 to 36 months. So you guys got to all go home and take your peas. Eat your peas. See, that's what you're being told. Go home and eat your peas. And my response in a blog post that I wrote earlier this week is you can take your peas and shove it. That's my opinion. They are colliding. And we've been headed off this fiscal cliff. And all we have done is switch between the left lane and the right lane. To the left lane, to the right lane. Both parties are taking us off the cliff and have taken us off the cliff. Nobody's actually getting the car off the road and putting it onto a different road. Since Obama likes car metaphors. Right? Now, I'm running for the Republican nomination because I believe in the Republican creed. I would like to restore integrity to the Republican creed. Yes. So So what is it that I'm running on? It gives you a little glimpse of why I'm running. And I call it the Radtke Road to Recovery. You got to come up with these cute little quips. The Radtke Road to Recovery, and it's 5 R's. And the first one is that we have to restore fiscal sanity. We have to restore fiscal sanity. Now, we've gone from a $10 trillion debt when Obama took office to approaching $15 trillion. We're going there quickly. It is hard for somebody to grasp how much money that is. So, Facebook is a lovely thing. You can learn a lot of things from people on Facebook and Twitter, I've learned. And someone had a post the other day, and I did the math and checked it, that if you were to equate every second to $1 spent, and we're at over $14 trillion, so $1 a second, $1 a second, $1 a second. That would be equivalent with 14 trillion to over 452,000 years.
Wow.
$14 trillion is a lot of money. And here's the problem we have in Washington, D.C. tonight, is that both parties are talking about, except some few, how much more do we want to add to the debt? See, they're saying it's about spending cuts, but it really is the negotiation of how much more are you going to spend. When you're in a hole, stop digging. When you're in a hole, stop digging. The idea that you think that you can now dig yourself to a $17 trillion hole, but then I'm going to get out, is absurd. What's even more absurd is to think that Congress is telling you the truth, that they're going to cut trillions of spending over 10 years, and I promise you we'll be diligent every year about making those spending cuts.
Yeah, right.
You put a pile of drugs in front of a drug addict and you tell that drug, now don't you use those drugs. You put a pile of cash in front of a politician and you say, now don't you spend that money. They're going to spend it. When you're in a hole, you have to stop digging. Now, how do you do that with a $14 trillion debt? Right? I would submit to you that the conversation needs to be brought up to an entirely different level. And this is really the basis of my campaign. It is not about rolling back to 2008 spending, and we were spending a lot of money in 2008. It's not about cutting 5% or cutting 10%. What it's about is a more fundamental question that needs to be asked in this country. Do we or do we not believe in a constitutionally limited government?
We do.
Do we?
Yeah.
Do we believe in a constitutionally limited government? Did the founders have it right
Yes.
when they said that few and defined powers should be in Washington, D.C., and the remaining powers are reserved to the states or to the individuals?
Yes.
Now, they took time to write it as a very separate amendment, 9th and the 10th. Did they have it right?
Yeah.
Did they say, why do we have a constitutional government? It's not that as long as you have the power and you have the votes and you're the President of the United States and know how to sign your name at the bottom of the executive order, that you are free reign to do whatever you want. We have a constitution that is supposed to restrain Congress and the presidents based on enumerated powers. And we have moved to the point where as long as you have the votes and you have the power, you can do whatever you want. We still have a constitutionally limited government. And if we do, the question of restoring fiscal sanity starts to look a lot different. Because you look at Washington, D.C., it should look a lot different than it does right now. You start looking at programs and agencies and you say, does that even belong at the federal government? Or does that belong at the states? Or does that belong in the private market? So some examples. One was mentioned before I got up here, the Department of Energy. I mean, we are more dependent on oil now than we were when it was created under the Carter administration. 70% more, that's right, over 70%. Now, I, as a senator, do not need an entire federal department with tens of thousands of employees to sit there and write lots of papers to explain to me that I can drill for oil and coal and natural gas. What we need are politicians with the spine to get around the table and say, we will be energy independent.
Yes.
That's what we need.
Yeah.
This is what politicians do, is they want to shirk their responsibility, so we'll put a whole federal department together to handle it. Now, I realize that there are certain things with nuclear waste that have to be dealt with, but you don't need an entire federal department. You can put that in the Department of Defense. The rest you can shut down. Another one, which is near and dear to my heart, is the Department of Education.
Shut up now.
Boo.
Yes. Now look, the left would have you think that when God created Adam and Eve, on the very same day he created the Department of Education. That is what they would have you believe. They would have you believe that it has always been this way. Education has always been a federal issue. Oh my gosh, how dare you suggest? You are radical that you would suggest getting rid of the Department of Education. Excuse me? Excuse me. The Department of Education was created under the Carter administration. Prior to that, education was always a local and state issue. You can ask Speaker Vance Wilkins over there if you haven't read your Virginia Constitution. The Virginia Constitution gives the constitutional authority and mandate of the Commonwealth of Virginia to provide a quality public education to every citizen in Virginia. Guess who has the enumerated power to do that in the Virginia Constitution? It's a Virginia mandate. So now you take our dollar, send it up to the federal department, they take their nice bureaucratic and administrative cut out of it, send it back to you with a lot of nice rules from the NEA. Like no child left behind. How about Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac?
Yeah, lovely.
Now, I don't know where the Constitution went, but if you have it, you guys start thumbing through it and looking for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac in it. Let me know when you find it. They have had 14 of 15 losing quarters. The total taxpayer bailout of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac is now over $300 billion. The first quarter of this year, of 2011, they claimed an over $8 billion loss.
Still got their bonus.
Of this year, what's that?
They still got their bonus.
Yes. Not 2008, 2011. And right after they claimed the $8.7 billion loss, right after that, they said, oh, and can we have another $6 billion? Why is the federal government involved in the mortgage banking business? See, it comes back to another fundamental question. Do we or do we not believe in free markets?
We do.
Do we believe in free markets? Or do we think that politicians knows what's best and they can manipulate the market? How's that working out for you? As Herman Cain likes to say. Or the fact that we borrow money from China and loan it to Pakistan or any of these other countries and we pick up the interest payments.
Give it. Give it.
We give it.
Not loan. Not
Or give it.
Give it.
My bad. Thank you for the correction. See, a politician wanted to be corrected. That makes no sense. We have to ask ourselves, do we believe in a constitutionally limited government? And once you start asking those fundamental questions, then you can go back and say what needs to be cut. How far do you cut it back? Restore fiscal sanity. Reform entitlements. Look, it drives me insane to turn on the TV and see Granny going off the cliff. Right? That's what they show. Granny going off the cliff. Now, this is where sometimes conservatives are really bad at messaging. This is not about how big or small your slice of the pie is. Okay? Am I going to get this much money or this much money? How big is my slice of the pie is? Now, mind you, that they have stolen your retirement money, raided and stolen your retirement money, raided and stolen Medicare, $500 billion, and yet we still think it's sane to keep giving our money to the federal government so that we can ensure we have a retirement and have health care. I think that you should be in control of the decision making of your doctors. You should be in control of your time, and if you put your money there, it's your money that can't be used. That's the way it should be. This isn't about how small or big your slice of the pie is. I mean, we have to wake up. This is about, will there be a pie? Will there be a pie? That's the discussion that's going on right now. Not how small or big. And so we've got to reform entitlements, and we've got to start thinking outside the box. We have to look at retirement. No one's talking about doing anything for people that are 55 and older, but you've got to start looking and saying, well, what is the Chilean model on retirement? Their pension plan. You've got to start saying, maybe we incentivize Social Security people to work longer, and they get to keep their payroll taxes if they work beyond the retirement age. We've got to look at large health savings accounts. There's a number of things that can be done, but this system is broken.
How about taking 30 million people who have never contributed to Social Security off Social Security?
That would be a good start as well. Absolutely. So you're at Liberty, so you got to say amen. The third one is we have to revitalize the economy. You can shrink the size of the federal government, which has to be done regardless, because it's the constitutional thing to do. But we still have to grow this economy. And we're sitting at over 9% unemployment. The Democrats haven't passed a budget in over 2.5 years. They've spent almost $5 trillion. And when you turn on the news, the Republicans and the conservatives are to blame that government's going to shut down. Explain that one to me. So, hey, George. So, we have to revitalize the economy. And what I would suggest to you is two things. Is that we have to take our business and our individual taxes and go to one flat rate and get rid of all our special interests and loopholes that we have. Now, that's my short-term proposal while I'm busy about trying to abolish the IRS and have a consumption tax, which is a more long-term proposal. Now it takes longer to implement. And we have some of the most job-killing, suffocating regulations out there that proactively kill jobs. And I've seen them as I've traveled across the country. There's an American furniture maker out here in Southwest Virginia. He told me 8 years ago he had 1,850 employees. And 8 years later, he said he has 27. He shut down the last factory in Galax in 2008. And he said it wasn't the wages, it was the taxes and the regulations. The American Lumber Company, he told me, got a 15% tax break if they sold their American lumber to China or to any other underdeveloped country. But guess what their tax break was if they took their American lumber and sold it to the American Lumber Company in Galax, Virginia? Nothing. We are in control of those policies. And we need to get fair, flat taxes and get rid of these job-killing regulations, whether it's the Dodd-Frank regulation, whether it's the EPA that is absolutely suffocating these companies. We tell businesses, we want you handcuffed, blindfolded, your feet bound, your earplugs in, blinders on. Oh yeah, now go compete with China. That's what we do to businesses in this country. And it has to stop. It has to stop. So we have to revitalize the economy. The next one is that we have to restrain Congress and the president. We have to restrain them. Because you can go through all these things, but if you don't put the restraints on there, as your good Congressman Tom Perriello said, he said, if you don't handcuff us, we can't stop the spending, I think is a paraphrase. Yeah, you know better than I do. You lived it, right? This is why you have to have a balanced budget amendment that caps spending and says you can't spend beyond 18% of GDP. This is why we need something called term limits that says you can't keep this. The founders did not envision that you would send a politician to DC and that they would walk up and down K Street and get their millions of dollars and then come back here to you guys and say, oh, I'm a citizen legislator running for re-election and I have my $10 million war trust, who wants to challenge me? I don't think the founders had that envision. There's something called the repeal amendment that I've been very involved in. The repeal amendment was an initiative that we undertook at the Federation. We used to have something called federalism in this country. It wasn't just checks and balances across the federal government, but the state being able to check the power of the federal government. We had that. We've lost that. The repeal amendment is an attempt to restore federalism. And it's a very simple thing. It says if 2/3 of the state legislators agree, of all across the states, 2/3 of the state legislators, that you can repeal any act of Congress, any rule, regulation, or tax. Can you imagine what Obamacare would look like right now? We had that repealing, right? And the last one to restrain Congress is that I think that, I don't know, it's just a personal opinion of mine, that Washington politicians should live under the same rules and have the same benefits as the rest of us.
That's right, Gloria Rangel.
Personal opinion. And my last R is that we have to reaffirm life, liberty, and property. Life, liberty, and property. Life is fundamental. It's the very most basic of rights. And once we start to devalue life, everything else falls apart. Everything else. Liberty and property. There's an all-out assault on property rights right now. Many of you may know about Agenda 21 and what's going on across not just our state, but across the country. We have an assault from the UN, you have assault from the EPA, you have an assault from NGOs. And it is amazing to me that people can't even own their property and use it the way they want to use it. There's amazing some of the things, the stories that I've heard. And once we lose life, liberty, and property, it's over. So, they're up in DC now. And they're talking about raising the debt ceiling.
Boo.
Now, there's a famous study that's called the Reinhardt-Rogoff study. And it says it studied countries over hundreds of years to look at when the tipping point was when that country started to fail. Someone's already said it. When the debt to GDP ratio is 90%, that's the tipping point for a country in decline. And it being very difficult to turn itself around. What are we at today in the United States? Any guesses? 70? 85? 95? Our debt to GDP ratio is 100%.
Oh my.
This is why those of you in this room are so important. You are the last line of defense for life, liberty, and property as we have always known it. This is why I'm running for my now, for my children's now, not just for their future, but for their now. For what now is going to look like. For what the next 20... We have men and women on foreign soil fighting for our freedom and sacrificing their lives. And the least that we can do is do our part here in this border to protect our liberty and our freedom and our property. So it's 8 o'clock, and I will tell you, and I'll be happy, if it's appropriate, I'll be happy to take questions because that's the best part of a Tea Party meeting. When I look up at DC and I look at the people who are fighting the fight, that have steel in the spine, that don't even mind rocking the boat or tipping the boat if necessary, it is not the politicians that have been up there for 2 decades.
Nope.
Or 3 decades.
Well, one.
Or one?
No, one politician.
One politician? It's this new generation of courageous leadership, these Republican Tea Party candidates, the Rand Pauls, the Mike Lees, the Rubios. Those are the ones that are up there fighting. The definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing over and over and over again and think, well, this time it'll be different. It makes no sense that the person who put the holes in the boat to elect them to go back up there and plug the holes in the boat that they put in the boat. That doesn't make sense. We have to start sending people up to Washington, D.C. who reflect our communities, our churches, our businesses. That's what we need. Not career politicians, not Washington insiders. And that's why I'm running for office. But it will take your help. It's going to take your help. I cannot do this alone. 500,000 voters we have to reach, and I'm not capable of reaching 500,000 voters single-handedly. I will try, but I will not be able to do it. And it's going to take the Tea Party movement. It's going to take people who help out on Twitter, trying to push my name out as far and wide on Facebook. I need people here today, if you're willing, and talk to us about saying I'll be in charge of my precinct, because we have to have a strong organization and ground game to make up for financial costs. We've raised about $250,000 since we started the campaign. Not too shabby for the Tea Party.
That's right.
Not too shabby. But we're going to have to make it up on organization. And we need help. If you will organize your precinct, we need to know that now, because we're going to have to start collecting petition signatures. We need your help spreading word. We know people who vote in primary voters, and we need people who are willing to make 50 phone calls. We look at your zip code and we say, here are 50 people in your zip code that vote in primaries, and I need you to call them and let them know that there's a woman running for United States Senate named Jamie Radtke. These are very practical things that you can do from your home that would be a tremendous help. And the last thing is the thing I'm the most excited about, and I called Mark last night and told him, is that, you know, God always answers prayer. And somebody called and said that they own a 39-foot RV. And they're going to lend it to us for the campaign.
All right.
Yeah. So we're going to wrap that sucker and look like Sarah Palin. But when I went to see it yesterday, he happened to mention that it only got 7 miles to the gallon. So we're going to start a fundraising campaign for the bus. We hope to launch it in 3 weeks. We're in the design. It's going to cost about, it looks like $3,500 to $4,000 to have the entire 39-foot bus wrapped. And then we're going to have monthly liability insurance, and then we're going to have just the gas costs. It's diesel. So if you're able to make a contribution tonight, it would be we want to launch it in 3 weeks. And there's envelopes and cards. If you want to pay by credit card, you can write it right there on the card, or a check, or cash, or whatever you're able to do. You're the first to find out. I haven't told anyone outside my campaign until just now about the bus. We're absolutely thrilled. This will do tremendous things to raise the visibility of the campaign and name ID, to have Radtke on 39-foot billboard going around the state. And I told people that I was just going to go up in Washington, D.C. and park it on 95 in traffic. And everybody will know who I am. So with that, I am done. I thank you so much for letting me take up so much of your time. I know that there's other people here to speak. And do you want me to take questions, or do you want me just to wait till afterwards?
We can do about five questions.
Okay, he said 5 questions. All right, Jerry.
What would you do about the illegal immigrants, not just from Mexico, but from all over the world that come here?
Yeah. Well, the question was about illegal immigration. I'll just paraphrase it, or my position on illegal immigration. Well, first of all, I mean, you asked about around the world, but we have to secure our borders first. That's the first thing we have to do. And we have soldiers on foreign soil defending the borders of Afghanistan, but we can't seem to defend our own borders on our own country of people coming into this country. That makes no sense whatsoever. And we have people being killed on our borders and massacred. So this is a major issue. The other thing you have to do is you have to remove the incentives for people to come. And we have a lot of incentives that encourage people to come here illegally. And one of the ones that I've talked about is the fact that people that come here and that are illegal and have children here, and they're frequently called anchor babies, and we need to get rid of that. We need to modify the 14th Amendment so that if you're illegal and you have a child here, it's not an automatic citizenship in this country.
Right.
Yeah.
There was an Associated Press article in the News and Advance this week that was about George Allen running, and it did not mention anyone running against him, said they were of no consequence.
Well, I think
listing your name.
yeah, well, it was the News in Advance.
The Associated Press.
Right, yeah.
They were just running Associated Press.
It just depends on the reporter. There are some that want to marginalize. You know, Alan's team worked very hard at trying to pretend like there's nobody in their rearview mirror.
Right.
And they're going to continue to do that. And it's really going to be up to you writing letters to the editor, Facebook, Twitter. Social media was incredibly powerful last year in the elections, and it's going to make or break this campaign. We have been on Fox News. I was on Fox News, I guess it was about 10 days ago. National Fox News. We've been on CNN. We've been in the Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Examiner, the National Journal. We've gotten a tremendous amount of coverage. I was down here in Lynchburg a few weeks ago and did an interview with the local TV. Done a lot of local TV. So we are getting press. But they'll continue to try to pretend like there's no one here, and it's just a matter of, you know, the Tea Party's not one to sit around and be quiet, so you help out in that regard. Another one? Oh, I bet I know what this was going to be about.
Yes. No, a lot of you're talking about fiscal responsibility. We spent about $1 trillion trying to prevent drug use. It's utterly failed. Some of these violations of our liberties, also along with the drug war, the border, along with our drug war. What would you do as a senator to try to start rolling that back?
Start rolling it back, what?
The criminal prohibition of drugs.
Nothing. I'm not for legalizing drugs, so.
Would you continue to vote for spending billions of dollars on policies that are not
Hi,
working?
I'll call you in just a little bit.
I'll look at policies. I mean, there's so much stuff packed in legislation. What is the legislation? What is it supposed to achieve?
It is passed.
But I am not for making drug use legal. And I believe that it has a huge impact on society, drug use, and the fabric of society, the same way I feel about family being the first institute of government, and it creates the foundation of a society. If you destroy the family, you destroy the foundation of society, and seeing what drugs do. So I'm not for...
I'm always interested in folks who talk liberties and talk about fiscal responsibility and how they reconcile that philosophy with the philosophy of the government. You know,
easy.
And us having seen the failure of the first prohibition, I mean, nobody in here would continue that.
Alcohol.
Right. Caused crime. Didn't reduce drinking. Same thing with drugs, except we've done it for so much longer, spent so much more money.
Because to me, drug use isn't a fiscal issue. It's a moral issue, and it's an issue of not just if it was someone using drugs and it was their personally what they did, and it could be contained only within them and didn't have impacts across the rest of society. That would be one thing, but that's not what happens when you have drug users, and you have heroin users, you have crack users. That they do have an impact on society. They do have an adverse impact on society. They do have an adverse impact when you want to talk about fiscal issues and the impact it has on welfare, on people who are in drugs that need help, that are dependent on federal spending of their because they can't take care of themselves. So it does have a negative impact on all of society, both financially as well as morally. So that's why on that libertarian issue, there's a lot of areas with libertarians that have a tremendous in common with on Patriot Act, on a lot of stuff with foreign wars and stuff, but that's the one issue where we just disagree. Sorry. I know he's disappointed. I'm sorry.
That's okay, I appreciate your answer.
Yeah.
Would you suggest that it should not be at the federal level and should all be back to the state level, so let the states manage not only the enforcement, the monies, and I don't see in the Constitution anywhere about the DEA or BATF.
That's a very good point. That's a very good point. And one of the things that I've talked about a lot is what is it that what can be better done and administered at the state level, and allowing the states to do it, and setting their rules and being closer to the issue. And one of the reasons why I was also for block granting, for example, Medicaid and education. So that is a good point, and especially also on the guns as well. So, one more? Okay, one more. Who wants to be the lucky one?
Do you have a feel for what Mitch McConnell is trying to do with his proposal to the president?
Well, I would like not to try to get into the psyche of Mitch McConnell, but I called it the McConnell-McFlurry yesterday. That's the new phrase, the McConnell-McFlurry. I mean, it looks like capitulation to me. I think this is about wanting to, this is what happens all the time in Washington, D.C., is that now it's about, I don't want to get blamed. Or we may lose power, control, or, rather than doing what's right, if getting our fiscal house in order and saving this country from a default, because this country will default. It will default if they do nothing. It will default if we continue to add trillions in spending. This is what I don't get. They are saying we're going to default if we don't make a decision by the debt ceiling. It will have major ramifications if we continue to spend over $1.5 trillion every year that we don't have. Yesterday, the Federal Reserve actually started talking about quantitative easing 3. There are serious ramifications to how much the dollar has lost. And see, the default is just going to be that your dollar is going to not be worth anything. That's what's going to happen. So I don't know if you guys saw, Ron Paul asked Bernanke, is gold money? And Bernanke said no. See, that's our problem, you see. But this is about, if it took, it's got to be about what's doing right. It's got to be about doing right. And if that means you don't win re-election, then that's fine. But if it means saving the country, I don't care if I don't get re-elected. But that's what they're worried about. I mean, but I understand, I think what he was trying to do, is that they haven't put a budget down for 2.5 years. They have not, they have spent almost $5 trillion. And they are yelling that we're going to default and that the apocalypse will happen next week. And they won't put a proposal on the table. And I think it was him trying to push. But the problem is his solution doesn't force a solution. It allows them to just circumvent the whole problem. So, all right, there's one more. Okay, one more. Oh, y'all gonna have to fight it out. Both of you raised your hand.
I need to ask a question. It might be, you all might think I'm crazy. I do not understand. My life, my whole working career, I paid into Social Security, I paid into Medicare, and now I'm retired, and I'm still paying my Medicare insurance. Our government is talking about cutting our benefits that we paid in our whole working career. They're talking about cutting Social Security. They've already cutting into our Medicare. I do not understand why do they have to cut us? Why don't they cut the benefits to other nations? Right. They're giving too much money away to Pakistan and all these other countries. They're giving all this money to them to be nice. Forget this. Charity begins at home. We're the ones that paid the bill. Where do you stand on that? Let me ask you that. If you get in there, are you going to fight for us? I'm sure you will. I have no doubt. I don't hear nothing out of the government right now saying, we're not gonna cut your benefits, we're gonna start cutting the money we're giving to all these other countries. And when the State Department gave billions of dollars to these Muslim nations to rebuild their mosques, the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of.
So,
That's money we could have put into us. I'm sorry, I'm not crazy.
so what I would say to you is this, is that number one, if we pull all our foreign aid, it still doesn't stop them from cutting your benefits, okay? No, it doesn't, the amount of money, entitlements are over 60% of the federal budget. The amount of money we give to foreign companies or USAID or NGOs is so small in comparison to the entitlement budget. So even if they cut all that, they still have to sit here and look at what they do about the entitlements. The proposals that are on the table right now is what it is that Paul Ryan is trying to do is protect the people that have put in their money and have for Medicare and for Social Security and secure that for people 55 and older. But let me ask you something. Given your experience over the last couple decades, the fact that you just stood up and are very upset because the federal government has taken your money, would you recommend to me to keep giving my money to the federal government?
No.
See, I mean, this is the problem. We've got to protect those of you that have already invested and you've given your money to the federal government.
Right.
But the definition of insanity is keep doing the same thing over and over again. Given the experience you've had, I don't want to give my money to the federal government. And there's other ways, there are other plans, options out there. You've got to start giving people options. And this goes back to, again, just the more fundamental issue about whether we believe in free markets and whether we believe in the individual and individual liberty. Because if you're smart enough to get your car insurance and get your life insurance and buy a house, and most of the time you're smart enough to pick a spouse, I should be able to figure out how to pick my health insurance. So, I mean, no one's talking about cutting your benefits. That is a scare tactic of the liberal left, and you can't let them sort of take you down that rabbit trail. That's not what we're talking about. So, well, I'd love to take more questions.
Thank you for your answer.
Yeah. But I think Vance is supposed to come up here. Is that right? I saw him on the agenda. Is that? I don't know what the deal is. I don't want to. Okay. Well, I will. Do you want me to stop?
No, go ahead.
Okay. All right. I'll take. Yeah, but I don't want to. I don't want to mess
Is it
Ingrid.
possible for Congress to rescind previous legislation? Now, what I meant with that is an awful lot of these things you talk about, rules and regulations, come out of previous legislation, and the court reaffirms that legislation by allowing these government agencies to legally do what they do. Can you rescind the Clean Air Act? Now, to me, that's what you really got to do, because that takes away all the legal basis for all the other trash that falls in place, and the court now reaffirms.
There's a couple of answers to that. Number one, it seems to be that the method of madness, instead of rescinding, is that they'll pass new legislation to revoke. Instead of just, I guess it's the same thing, but they'll pass legislation and they'll revoke certain things. And that is what the hope is for Obamacare, is that they're looking at Obamacare and they want to just what they call repeal and revoke that legislation. And it has its tentacles and everything. The other thing that is being proposed that I'm a strong proponent of, and is being, not me, I know, it is me, oh my goodness. I just got a new phone today, sorry about that. The other thing that's being proposed is by Rand Paul, is called the REINS Act, R-E-I-N-S. And how many branches of government do we have? Here's your quiz. Three. I know. See, I know, it seems like there's 4 branches of government. And what the REINS Act does is it says that any major rule or any spending by any federal department or bureaucracy that's going to be over $100 million, which unfortunately is nothing to the federal government, has to actually get a vote of Congress. The Congress has to approve that. They can't continue to implement these policies, whether it's net neutrality, whether it's cap and trade, whether it's financial Dodd-Frank regulation, and just continue to do it and have all this power, that it has to come to Congress, and Congress has to vote and give the approval for all that coming out of those bureaucracies. So that's the second, because with the federal government, you can work on a repeal, and while you're working on that, you want to also create accountability over here. It's, you want to attack the beast at every side. So those are the two things that they're working on, is repealing it, which is what you've talked about, repealing legislation, and also the REINS Act. So, well, thank you guys very much, and I will be sticking around, and I'd love to have